Oh, hello there. What's that? After beginning to read The Great Gatsby, you'd like to know a little bit more about the 1920s in America? Well, you're in luck, because I happen to know a little bit about that. So sit back, relax, and take a journey with me into the past. The 1920s were known as the Roaring Twenties, because following the Great War, the United States entered a period of prosperity and social change. People from around the country migrated to cities. Music and art began displaying influences from African American culture. Young people established a new consumer mindset and began spending their money on innovative new technologies and products. Women eschewed traditional cultural expectations and carved out their own roles in society. However, the 20s were also a time of turmoil, as the old clashed with the new, and it became clear that prosperity did not belong to everyone. F. Scott Fitzgerald painted a vivid picture of this new era in America and drew on the progress and tensions of the 1920s as he constructed the elements of his novel. Let's take a look at some of the key parts of the Roaring Twenties to give you a better understanding of the context behind Fitzgerald's writing. The Jazz Age. One of the defining characteristics of the Roaring Twenties is the advent of jazz music. One of the defining characteristics of the Roaring Twenties is the advent of jazz music. In The Great Gatsby, we see the influence of music during Gatsby's boisterous parties. Fitzgerald portrayed jazz as a vehicle for a kind of outrageous fun and recklessness that had never been seen before. Jazz was flashy, infectious, and inherently cool. As more young, fun-loving people with means bought new cars and could drive into cities to see live music, the popularity of jazz exploded. At the same time, records by popular jazz artists flew off the shelves, and radio stations transmitted hit songs across the airwaves. The Harlem Renaissance. The birth of the Jazz Age coincided with the migration of African Americans from the South into northern cities. In Harlem, jazz music thrived, and a generation of talented African American writers emerged to tell a different kind of American story. This explosion of creativity and expression was known as the Harlem Renaissance. A major result of the Harlem Renaissance was an increase in the prominence of black culture and input on society. The New Woman, or flappers. One of the most iconic images of the 1920s was the flapper, or more formally, the New Woman. Flappers were young women who balked at traditional expectations of female behavior. They had short, bob haircuts, wore skimpy dresses, enjoyed drinking and smoking cigarettes, and could be found at jazz clubs. In The Great Gatsby, many of the female attendees at Gatsby's parties would be considered flappers or new women, including Jordan Baker. She represents the freedom, capability, and independence of the modern woman in the 1920s. Most women in America did not fully adopt the freedom and rebellion of the flapper lifestyle, but most did adopt the trendy fashion choices associated with the flappers. Women also had increased economic and social opportunities during the 1920s and gained new freedoms like the right to vote. Prohibition. Considering the reputation of the 1920s as a wild time in American history, as well as the crazy parties portrayed in the book, it's easy to forget that alcohol was banned by the U.S. government during the 1920s. With the passage of the 18th Amendment in 1919, the government outlawed all beverages with an alcohol content above 0.5%. However, the law didn't stop most Americans from using alcohol. It simply drove alcohol use from legal establishments to underground speakeasies and clubs. In fact, outside of cities, alcohol production continued fairly uninhibited in bathtubs and woodshed distilleries. In The Great Gatsby, Fitzgerald portrays speakeasies, as well as the influence of organized crime on the underground alcohol industry, as a dark underside to the carefree parties that Gatsby throws at his house. Additionally, Prohibition was a response by some elements of American society to the emerging culture of the cities. Limiting alcohol was viewed by many middle and upper class Americans as a way to control the immigrant and minority populations who lived in cities, as well as the droves of young people who seemed to have abandoned traditional values and cultural practices. Culture conflict. Since the 1920s were an incredible time of growth and change in America, tension between traditional and progressive elements of society was inevitable. The heightened prominence of African American culture displayed through the Harlem Renaissance and the surging popularity of jazz music disturbed some white Americans. Fearful people flocked to the Ku Klux Klan in droves, boosting their numbers by millions of members. The new KKK preyed on fears of black Americans, but also espoused hatred for Catholics, Jews, and new women. Additionally, some traditional elements of American society grew increasingly fearful of communism and the immigrant populations in urban areas. Innovation and consumerism. The increased prosperity of the 1920s meant that Americans chose to spend their money on entertainment and new technology. Americans attended jazz shows and bought records. They could afford to buy cars and new electrical home appliances like refrigerators and vacuum cleaners, went to the movies frequently, and purchased radios. Fitzgerald highlighted the consumerism of the 1920s through the protagonists in the novel, especially Gatsby. While the average person had more money to spend on new products and entertainment, the rich like the Buchanans, Gatsby, and Nick spent excessively on their homes, clothes, food, drink, and other luxuries. Think about the ways that your life today is different from the 1920s, as well as how it might be similar in some ways. In class, we'll start to think about and discuss this further in an effort to understand the key facets of the Roaring Twenties and therefore understand the novel even more. I hope this was an informative journey back to a fascinating period in American history. Thanks for listening.